For months he lay in silence, a handsome young CEO trapped in a coma. Until one nurse refused to give up, what happened next shocked everyone. Lily Walsh adjusted the strap of her pale blue scrubs as she stepped into the hushed corridor of St. Matthew's Medical Center. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, casting their cold glow across polished floors that smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. It was her fourth consecutive night shift, and though fatigue tugged at her shoulders, she carried herself with the steady composure of someone used to exhaustion. Nurses never admitted to being tired, not when lives, silent, fragile lives, were tethered to machines down dim hallways. Room 407 had become her private world. Behind its glass door, beneath the rhythmic rise and fall of ventilator sighs, lay a man who seemed to have stepped out of another life entirely. Evan Cole, 30 years old, chief executive officer of one of Boston's fastest-growing tech firms, the kind of name whispered on the covers of business magazines, was now reduced to stillness. His once commanding presence existed only in the quiet authority of machines, the steady blip of the heart monitor, the hiss of oxygen, the steady drip of medication into his veins. Dark hair framed his pale face, and his closed eyes, hidden under long lashes, gave him the look of someone merely sleeping, though everyone knew it was a sleep without promises. The hospital staff referred to him as the coma patient in 407, but Lily never used that phrase. She called him by name, even if no one seemed to hear. "Good evening, Mr. Cole," she said softly as she slipped into the room, her voice breaking the mechanical monotony. She checked his IV, adjusted the tubing, and gently moistened his lips with a cotton swab dipped in water. Each motion was deliberate, as though reverence itself might keep his spirit tethered. Boston had already written his story. The devastating car accident on a rain-slicked highway, the company's board rumored to be scheming in his absence, the uncertain fate of a man who had once seemed untouchable. Newspapers called it tragedy. Investors called it instability. But for Lily, standing at his bedside night after night, it was something else, an intimate guardianship. She wasn't thinking of corporate power struggles or headlines. She thought of the fragility of flesh and breath, of the invisible thread holding one human being to the world. Sometimes when the silence pressed too heavily on her chest, she whispered things she'd never tell anyone else. She told him about her little brother Nick, only 16, and waiting for a heart surgery that insurance barely covered. She confessed her fears aloud, half to herself and half to him, because speaking them made them easier to carry. She even hummed the lullaby her mother used to sing, soft, wavering notes that filled the sterile room with something almost warm. Her colleagues teased her gently. "You talk to him as if he'll answer." Lily would just smile. They didn't see the tiny flickers of his eyelashes when she greeted him, or the way his breathing seemed to steady with the sound of her voice. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. She chose to believe he could hear her, because hope, however irrational, was the only antidote to despair. That night, as she smoothed the blanket over his chest and whispered, "Rest well, Mr. Cole," she didn't know that a subtle shift was already stirring beneath the stillness, that something buried deep inside the Millionaire CEO was listening, waiting, and would soon remind the world that he was not finished yet. The second week of Lily's night shifts blended into one another like an endless reel of dim corridors, hushed voices, and the monotonous music of machines. Yet for her, there was always room 407, a place where she felt strangely rooted, even when exhaustion pulled at her bones. On the surface, Evan Cole remained unchanged, stillness wrapped in hospital linens, his face pale against the white pillow, the steady rhythm of the monitor keeping time. But Lily had begun to notice something that others dismissed. It happened first at the change of shift. She entered as she always did, speaking into the silence, her voice soft but deliberate. "Good morning, Mr. Cole. I'm here again." She had not expected anything but the familiar quiet. Then as she leaned closer to adjust the line of his IV, she caught it, the faintest twitch beneath his closed eyelids. So small it could have been a trick of light or the shadow of her own movement. She paused, heart thudding, waiting to see if it would repeat. Nothing. Just stillness again. The next night she tested it. "Mr. Cole," she whispered, "if you can hear me, try to blink." Her voice trembled with the weight of her own hope. And there it was. Two slow, deliberate closures of his eyelids, as though his body had pushed against the heavy curtain of silence to reach her. Lily's breath caught. She gripped the bed rail, staring at him, afraid that the world would snatch the moment away. When she told the head nurse the following morning, the reaction was swift and clinical. Reflexes, the older woman said, shaking her head. You've been working too many nights, Walsh. Don't read into it. Doctors echoed the sentiment. Reflex, muscle spasm, random firing of neurons. Nothing more. But Lily knew better. She had seen reflexes before. This was not random. This was a signal. She refused to let it go. She began carrying a small notebook in her pocket, jotting down the time, her words, his response. 1:14, said good night. 2 blinks. 3:27. Adjusted blanket, whispered, still with us? 2 blinks again. Patterns were emerging, like a language only the two of them shared. On the 4th night after she first saw the movement, she decided to try something bolder. She closed the blinds, dimmed the harsh hospital light, and pulled a small pen light from her bag. Her hands trembled as she held it over his closed eyelids. Mr. Cole, she said quietly, her voice carrying both the steadiness of a nurse and the vulnerability of a woman reaching into the dark. If you can hear me, blink twice. For a moment, nothing. Then with painstaking slowness, his eyelids descended and rose once. A pause, and then again. Twice. Precisely. The room suddenly seemed too small for the enormity of what had happened. Her throat tightened, and she whispered, "Oh my God, you really are there." She pressed her free hand to her mouth, fighting the sting of tears. She was not imagining it. She was not fabricating hope out of grief. He was responding. He was trying. The following hours were spent in a restless storm of possibilities. She spoke to him in careful questions, keeping them simple. Do you hear me? 2 blinks. Do you want me to keep talking to you? Another 2 blinks. The rhythm was patient, deliberate, each blink like a knock on a locked door. He was there, behind the veil, waiting. By morning, when another nurse arrived to relieve her, Lily looked disheveled, her eyes rimmed with sleepless excitement. She tried to explain, but they only offered tired smiles, the kind you give a colleague who has been working too long under fluorescent lights. No one believed her yet, but the notebook in her pocket did not lie. Walking out of the hospital into the pale dawn, Lily knew something had shifted. The man in room 407 was not just a patient anymore, not just a millionaire CEO reduced to stillness. He was awake in his own way, trapped but reaching out. And she was the only one who had heard him. Dr. Marcus Bennett had the kind of expression that rarely shifted from skepticism. He was a tall, deliberate man with iron gray hair and a reputation for cutting through wishful thinking with clinical precision. When Lily approached him with her notebook, he scanned it in silence, lips pressed into a line. She had written everything down, every time, every word, every blink. And though her handwriting trembled with urgency, the data spoke clearly. Still, Bennett's brow furrowed as if her enthusiasm irritated him. Reflexes can be misleading, he said, setting the notebook down on his desk. Families, nurses, even physicians, they all want to see meaning in the smallest twitch. It's dangerous to read too much into it. Lily leaned forward, her voice firm. This isn't wishful thinking, it's consistent. He blinks exactly when asked, and only then. That's not reflex, that's intention. Bennett studied her face a long moment, then sighed. All right, let's test him together. That night they entered room 407 with the clinical coolness of an experiment. The machines hummed their eternal chorus. The monitor's heartbeat, the ventilator's sigh. Evan lay motionless, but Lily swore his presence was sharper now, as though some invisible energy hung between them. She stood at his side, her heart racing, while Bennett positioned himself at the foot of the bed, arms folded. Mr. Cole, Lily began softly, but with enough authority to carry through the sterile air. If you can hear me, blink twice. A pause, and then 1 blink. Another. 2, deliberate and slow. Bennett's posture stiffened. His eyes narrowed. Again, he said quietly. She repeated the question. Evan blinked twice again. The neurologist circled the bed, his expression shifting from disbelief to measured curiosity. Let's test yes and no responses, he murmured. He leaned close. Mr. Cole, blink once for no, twice for yes. Do you understand? Two blinks. Yes. Lily almost smiled but kept herself composed, afraid of breaking the fragile spell. Are you in pain? Bennett asked. One blink. Number. Do you know where you are? Two blinks. Yes. Are you at home? One blink. Number. In a hospital? Two blinks. Yes. Bennett exhaled slowly, straightening. His skepticism cracked under the weight of undeniable evidence. My God, he whispered. He's conscious. From that moment, the room transformed. It was no longer a space of silence and inevitability. It became a classroom, a laboratory, a secret chamber of communication. Bennett devised more structured tests, repeating questions in different forms to eliminate chance. Each time, Evan's responses were steady, precise. The language of blinks had been born, but Lily wanted more. She wanted to give him back his voice. The following evening, she arrived carrying a cardboard sheet marked with the alphabet in neat rows. Each row colored differently with highlighters she borrowed from the nurse's station. If you can't speak, we'll spell it out, she whispered to him, laying the sheet across her lap. I'll call out the colors. You blink when I reach the one you want, then we'll narrow it down to the letter. The process was painstaking. Lily pointed to the first row, A through F colored green, no blink. The second row, blue, no blink. The third, yellow, a blink. She traced her finger along the letters. G, H, I, blink. Then again, H. She wrote it down on her pad. Letter by letter, the message took shape. The first attempt took nearly half an hour, each blink laboriously pulled through layers of silence. But when she read it aloud, her throat tightened. Lily. Her name. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the sudden rush of tears. You know me, she whispered, voice breaking. You've heard me all along. The next word came faster, the blinks more urgent now that the door to expression had been cracked open. THANK. And then YOU. Thank you. Lily's vision blurred. She covered her mouth with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the enormity of two simple words. The millionaire CEO, the man everyone thought was lost to the void, had used the smallest flicker of his eyelids to break through the silence and tell her he was grateful. Dr. Bennett watched with solemn awe, scribbling notes furiously. This changes everything, he said under his breath. This man isn't gone. He's trapped, but he's here, and he's trying to come back. That night when Lily finally left the hospital, she stepped out into the cool Boston air with her heart pounding. The city stretched around her, oblivious to what had just happened inside the walls of St. Matthew's. The newspapers still called Evan Cole a vegetative patient. The boardroom still whispered of replacing him, but Lily knew the truth now. The man in room 407 was fighting, one blink at a time, and she would fight alongside him until the rest of the world heard his voice. The nights that followed blurred into one long, unbroken vigil. Lily lived between the steady pulse of the heart monitor and the flicker of eyelids that had become her lifeline to him. With each session at his bedside, the alphabet board grew less like a crude tool and more like a sacred instrument. Every blink carved a hole through the silence. Every painstakingly spelled word stitched together a fragile bridge between his world and hers. She no longer doubted. She no longer asked herself if it was coincidence. Evan Cole was there, alive, aware, and desperate to be heard. It began with small things. He spelled her name again, sometimes just the single letter L, when he grew too tired to finish. He said thanks, or yes, or no, in the simplest blinks. But then late on a Wednesday shift, as the rain battered the hospital windows, Lily sensed a change in his urgency. His blinks came faster, sharper, as though some inner fire had flared awake. She steadied herself, pulling the alphabet board closer. All right, she whispered. One row at a time. We'll get there. She called out the colors. Green, no response. Blue, no response. Yellow, blink. She ran through the letters. G, H, I, J, K. No blink. L, M, N, O. Blink. Oh, she said, writing it down. Then again, W. Then E. Then N. The word was slow, halting, but unmistakable. Owen. She looked at him, startled. Owen. Who's Owen? More blinks, more letters. Pierce. Owen Pierce. It took her nearly 40 minutes to piece together the full name, but when she finally whispered it aloud, Owen Pierce, a faint flutter ran across his brow, as though he had smiled beneath the paralysis. Is that your lawyer? She asked gently. 2 blinks. Yes. Do you want me to contact him? 2 blinks again, urgent this time. Lily sat back, her heart racing. This was no small request. A nurse did not call a patient's lawyer in the middle of the night without cause. Yet as she stared at Evan's still body, she felt the weight of the moment pressing on her. He was not simply reaching for human connection anymore. He was reaching for his life, his identity, his company. The next night, when Dr. Bennett arrived to continue his observations, Lily told him, he spelled out a name, Owen Pierce. He wants me to call him. Bennett raised an eyebrow, skepticism flickering again in his eyes, but he agreed to witness another session. Together they sat as Evan painstakingly blinked through the sequence once more. Owen Pierce, lawyer, board, remove. The words fractured and slow formed a grim mosaic. Bennett's face grew grave. He's aware of what's happening outside these walls, he muttered. He knows the board is trying to take control. The following day, Owen Pierce himself walked into room 407, a tall man with a sharp suit and a briefcase clutched like a weapon. He looked out of place amid the antiseptic sterility, yet when he saw Evan, something softened in his face. Evan, he whispered, moving to the bedside. If you can hear me, give me a sign. 2 deliberate blinks. Lily watched as the lawyer's composure faltered. He pressed a hand to his forehead, muttering, Jesus Christ, they told me you were gone. The next hours unfolded like a courtroom staged in miniature. Bennett documented the exchanges on video, asking Evan a series of verifiable questions, his full name, his company's founding year, the product that had secured their first investors. Each answer emerged slowly, but each was precise. Piece by piece, Evan proved he was not only conscious but capable of exercising intent. Owen leaned close, his voice low, steady, but burning with conviction. They want to declare you unfit. They want to vote you out. But this changes everything. With this proof, we can fight back. I can protect your seat until you're strong enough to return. 2 blinks. Yes. For the first time since she had met him, Lily saw something shift in Evan's entire presence. He was no longer just a man clawing his way out of silence. He was a leader again, a strategist. Even in his broken body, he carried himself with the quiet command of a man who had built an empire. That night, when the hospital grew quiet and the lawyer had gone, Lily sat by his bed, her notebook filled with jagged letters and urgent messages. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaned closer and whispered, You're not just fighting to wake up, are you? You're fighting for your world, for everything you built. His eyelids trembled. 2 blinks. Yes. She exhaled shakily, her throat tightening. Then I'll help you, she said. Whatever it takes. You're not alone in this. The monitors ticked on, the machines hummed, and outside the storm rolled across the city. But in room 407, a silent pact had been made. The battle for Evan Cole's life, and for the empire he had left behind, had just begun. The first sign came at dawn. Lily had just finished checking his vitals when she saw the faintest movement in his right hand. It was nothing more than the twitch of a finger, a subtle tremor that could have been overlooked if she hadn't been watching him as closely as she always did. She froze, her breath caught in her chest, afraid to blink herself in case the moment vanished. Then it happened again, the slow curl of his index finger, struggling against the weight of stillness. Evan, she whispered, leaning over him, her voice trembling. If you can hear me, move again. The hand twitched, once, twice, purposeful, real. Her throat tightened with disbelief. She pressed the call button for Dr. Bennett, but even before he arrived, her heart already knew. Something had shifted. By the time the doctor entered the room, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, the movements had grown stronger. Evan's fingers curled faintly around the sheet, and his eyelids fluttered with restless energy. Bennett hurried to his side, issuing commands in a low, steady voice. Evan, can you squeeze my hand? He slipped his palm into Evan's and waited. A pause. A long silence broken only by the steady hum of machines. Then, an unmistakable pressure, weak but undeniable. Lily covered her mouth with her hand, tears stinging her eyes. He's coming back, she whispered. The next days were a whirlwind of cautious hope. Evan's responses grew clearer. Small squeezes, faint nods, flickers of movement in his legs. Physical therapists joined the team, working gently with his muscles to remind them of the world beyond paralysis. Each movement was like watching a man climb out of a pit stone by stone, his willpower pulling his body where medicine alone could not. And then one morning, when the sun cast golden stripes across the hospital blinds, it happened. Lily had just finished adjusting his pillows when she heard the faintest rasp. At first, she thought it was the hiss of the ventilator, but then it came again, rough and broken. "Wubby, water." She froze. The word was hoarse, strangled, barely more than a breath, but it was a word, his word. Her hands shook as she lifted a small sponge to his lips, letting him taste a drop of cool water. His eyes fluttered open, dark and glassy but alive, and he looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her. "Please," he whispered, his voice raw with the weight of silence broken. Lily gasped, a sob of relief escaping her. "You're here," she said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "You're really here." His lips curved faintly, the shadow of a smile. "Didn't go anywhere," he croaked. Over the following week, his progress astonished everyone. He learned to form short sentences, each one labored but deliberate. He could sit propped against pillows, watching the world with eyes that burned with determination. Every word he spoke carried a weight, as though he was determined not to waste a single breath. And every time Lily entered the room, his gaze followed her, steady and unyielding. One evening, after a grueling session with the therapist, Evan motioned weakly for her to come closer. She leaned down, brushing her hair back so he could see her clearly. His voice was still fragile, but his words were sharp. "You were my anchor," he said. "Your voice, your patience. You pulled me back." Lily shook her head, her eyes glistening. "No, you did that. You fought your way back." But he wasn't finished. His lips parted again, slower this time, as though he'd been holding the words in reserve. "Your brother, Nick." The sound of his name sent a jolt through her. She pulled back slightly, eyes wide. You heard that?" "Every word," Evan rasped. "You told me you were afraid, that he needed surgery, couldn't afford it." He paused, his breath uneven. "It's done. Consider it taken care of." She stared at him, unable to breathe, her mind reeling. "What? Evan, you don't have to." "Already. Called my assistant," he interrupted, a spark of his old authority flashing in his tired eyes. "Nick will have what he needs. Non-negotiable." Lily sank into the chair beside his bed, her tears flowing freely now. She had cared for him through endless nights, believing her words might disappear into the void, never to be heard. But he had heard. Every story, every whisper, every melody she hummed in the dark. He had carried them with him through the silence. In that moment, the sterile hospital room felt transformed. No longer just a battleground for survival, it became a place of rebirth, where gratitude and grace mingled with the scent of antiseptic. For the first time, Lily saw not only the patient she had fought for, but the man himself, still fragile, still tethered to machines, yet already reaching for the strength of his former life. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. News of Evan's awakening spread through the hospital like fire racing across dry grass. First, it was whispered among the night nurses, who passed the story in quiet awe. The man in room 407 had spoken. By the end of the week, administrators were discussing it in clipped tones behind closed doors, and by the following Monday, the story had reached places far outside the hospital walls. Investors, journalists, and, most dangerously, members of his own board of directors began to circle like vultures, watching every development with sharpened interest. Lily saw the change immediately. For weeks she had moved through the corridors in quiet anonymity, caring for a man the world had written off as a silent figure. Now, whenever she stepped into his room, she found men in suits waiting in the hallway or hospital staff lingering just a little too long at the doorway, their curiosity barely disguised. She did her best to shield him from it, keeping her voice gentle and steady as she adjusted his blankets or helped him through the careful work of speech therapy. But Evan noticed everything. His dark eyes followed the shifting atmosphere with the same precision he had once used to read markets and boardrooms. One evening, when the nurses had gone and the machines hummed softly around them, Evan turned to her. His voice was stronger now, though still gravelly. "They think I'm weak," he said. "They're waiting to move in. My company, my life's work. They think I can't defend it." Lily reached for his hand, her heart tightening. "You've already proven them wrong. Look at what you've done. You've come back from the edge of nothing. That's more strength than any of them could imagine." His lips curved faintly, but his eyes were hard. "Strength isn't enough." Proof is the next day, Dr. Bennett arranged for a formal evaluation, both medical and legal. Representatives from the board had filed motions to have Evan declared incompetent, citing his months in a coma as evidence that he could no longer make rational decisions. It was a ruthless maneuver, one designed to strip him of power before he even had a chance to reclaim it. But Bennett had prepared. With Lily at his side, Evan demonstrated his awareness and competence, answering questions about dates, financial figures, and personal details with sharp precision. His voice faltered at times, but the content was undeniable. The legal representatives recorded everything. They asked him to state his name. He did. His birthday. He did. They asked the year his company had been founded, the names of key investors, the product that had launched his career. He answered them all, his words halting but exact. And then, when pressed with a final question, "Mr. Cole, do you understand the board's current attempt to remove you?" He paused, his gaze steady, and said clearly, "Yes, and I intend to stop it." The room fell into silence. Even the lawyer hired to discredit him faltered, fumbling with his notes. That night, when the hospital quieted, Evan asked Lily to wheel him to the window. Though still thin and weak, his frame leaned forward with a quiet determination. He gazed out at the glittering lights of Boston, the city that had once bowed to his ambition, and murmured, "Tomorrow, I'll show them I'm not finished." The following morning he returned, not to a boardroom, but to his company's headquarters in a wheelchair, his body still frail yet upright in its defiance. The lobby filled with employees who had heard rumors, but never expected to see their leader again. Cameras clicked, voices hushed, and then Evan began to speak. His voice was raw, not yet polished, but it carried the same force it always had, the force of a man who had survived silence and now demanded to be heard. "Technology means nothing," he told them, "if it cannot give us the most basic human gift, the ability to say, 'I am alive.' For months I was buried in stillness, unable to speak, unable to move. And yet one nurse refused to believe I was gone. Because of her, I had a voice again. Blinks, letters, words. Because of her, I stand before you now. And I promise you this, we will invest in every tool, every innovation, every spark of possibility to ensure no one is ever silenced again." The words rippled through the crowd like a current. Many had come expecting weakness, a broken man clinging to the last threads of dignity. Instead, they saw fire, tempered by suffering but sharpened into something even stronger. Applause thundered through the lobby, rolling upward through the glass walls like a storm. The board's coup collapsed within days. The court, armed with medical testimony and first-hand evidence of Evan's competency, blocked their attempt to seize control. Investors who had wavered rallied behind him again, the value of his company surging overnight, not because of profit projections, but because of belief. Back in the hospital that evening, exhausted but alive with adrenaline, Evan looked at Lily with a quiet smile. "That was the second miracle," he said, his voice softer now. She tilted her head, curious. "The second?" "The first," he said, reaching weakly for her hand, "was waking up to your voice. The second was proving to them, and to myself, that I am still here." Lily squeezed his hand, tears welling in her eyes. For the first time, she truly understood what it meant to fight not only for survival, but for the very core of one's identity. Evan had done the impossible, not just returning from a coma, but reclaiming his place in a world eager to forget him. And though the road ahead was still long, she knew with certainty that this was only the beginning of his return. The weeks that followed were a blur of recovery and headlines. Evan's name, once whispered in financial circles with pity or disdain, now appeared on front pages across the country with words like miracle, resurrection, and impossible comeback. To the world, he was a spectacle, the millionaire CEO who had awakened from the silence of a coma to reclaim his throne. To Lily, he was still a man relearning how to hold a fork, how to walk more than a few steps without trembling, how to breathe without wincing at the heaviness of it all. She stayed by his side as his hands grew steadier, as his voice grew stronger, as the hollowness in his cheeks slowly gave way to color. But something else was changing, something deeper than muscle or bone. In the quiet evenings, when the bustle of therapists and administrators had died down, Evan would stare at the ceiling or out the window, his eyes shadowed by thoughts he didn't yet share. Lily saw it in the way his fingers drummed on the armrest of his wheelchair, the way he seemed restless even when his body begged for rest. One night, after she had readjusted his blankets, he finally spoke. "Power," he murmured, his voice husky. "I used to think it was everything." She tilted her head, settling into the chair beside his bed. "And now? Now I know it's fragile. It vanishes the moment your voice is gone. The moment you can't speak, can't fight, the world decides you don't exist." His dark eyes flicked to her, sharp despite the weight of exhaustion. "I was alive, Lily. Alive. And they were already carving up my company, my legacy. Not one of them believed I was still in here." She reached for his hand, curling her fingers around his. "But you proved them wrong." A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't last. "Proving them wrong isn't enough. I have to prove something bigger. To them. To myself." It wasn't until 2 weeks later that she understood what he meant. On a crisp morning in early autumn, with the air sharp and clean after a night of rain, Evans summoned his board, his legal team, and a gathering of journalists to the company headquarters. Cameras lined the back of the room, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Employees crowded into every corner, whispering nervously, unsure what to expect. Evan rolled forward in his chair, his posture straight, his gaze steady. He no longer looked like the fragile patient Lily had first known. Though his body was still lean, his presence filled the room. The murmurs quieted as he began to speak. "For months," he said, his voice carrying with surprising strength, "I was locked inside myself. My body refused to move, my mouth refused to speak. To the world I was gone. But I was not gone. I was listening, I was waiting. And I realized something. Silence is the most brutal prison a human being can endure. Yet millions of people, stroke victims, patients with ALS, those living with traumatic injuries, are trapped in that prison every day, unheard, unseen." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I survived because one nurse refused to stop talking to me. She gave me back my voice when the rest of the world had taken it away. And because of her, I am here, alive, whole, ready to fight. But my fight cannot just be about me." A ripple of unease passed through the board members seated in the front row. They leaned forward, sensing what was coming, but powerless to stop it. "This company has given me everything," Evan continued. "But it was never just about profits. It was about innovation, about breaking barriers. Today I'm taking the greatest risk of my life, because it's the only way forward. Effective immediately, I am transferring 51% of my shares into a new trust, the Awake Voice Foundation." Gasps broke through the room. The CFO's eyes widened, and murmurs surged through the crowd like a wave. Evan raised his hand for silence. "The foundation will fund communication technology, neurorehabilitation programs, and training for medical staff across the country. No patient should ever be dismissed as lost simply because they cannot speak. No family should ever wonder if their loved one is still inside waiting. We will build bridges to those voices. We will give them back to the world." For a moment, the room was stunned into silence. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing the look of shock, admiration, outrage. Some board members looked ready to faint. Others scribbled notes with furious speed. But among the employees, something else stirred. Applause began in the back, tentative at first, then swelling, rolling forward until the entire room thundered with it. Lily, standing in the wings, felt her chest ache with pride. She knew how much this decision cost him. Control had been the heartbeat of his life. Every headline, every boardroom victory, every accolade had been rooted in his grip on power. And now he had given it away. Not for profit, not for prestige, but for strangers he would never meet. Later, when the crowd had dispersed and the journalists were filing their stories, she wheeled him back into his private office, the room where he had once signed contracts worth millions. He was pale, exhausted, the fire of adrenaline leaving him drained, but his eyes burned with clarity. "Are you sure?" she asked softly, kneeling beside him. "You just gave away your company." He shook his head, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Number, I gave it back to the people who need it most, and I've never been more certain of anything." Lily pressed his hand, her throat tight with emotion. "They'll call it reckless. They'll call it madness." "They will," he agreed. "But someday they'll call it necessary." And in that moment, she realized this was not just the return of a CEO or the survival of a millionaire. This was a transformation. The man who had clawed his way back from silence was no longer chasing the world's definition of power. He was rewriting it. The winter sun poured through the tall windows of St. Matthew's, casting long golden streaks across the tiled floor of the new rehabilitation wing. Lily walked slowly through the corridor, her shoes clicking softly against the polished linoleum. She could still hardly believe it was real. The wing that only months ago had been a dream whispered in Evan's hospital room now stood as a beacon of possibility. On the plaque at the entrance were the words, "The Lily Walsh and Dr. Marcus Bennett Communication Recovery Center." Inside, the world was alive with sound. Patients, once dismissed as silent, now tapped coded signals with their fingers, blinked deliberately to communicate with alphabet boards, or used new assistive devices funded by the Awake Voice Foundation. Families leaned close, tears streaming down their faces as they heard, "I love you," or "I'm still here," from lips that had been still for months. Lily felt her chest tighten every time she walked past them, remembering the nights when she herself had leaned over Evan, begging for the smallest flicker of acknowledgement. Nick was among them. Her brother was no longer the fragile, pale boy clinging to life. After his surgery, paid for in full without hesitation by Evan, he had begun to thrive. Now 16, he moved through the halls with energy, volunteering at the center after school. She often caught him laughing with patience, his voice bright and steady, his smile wide. It was the kind of normal she had prayed for in her loneliest nights, and it filled her with gratitude so overwhelming it almost hurt. Evan, too, was no longer the hollow shell she had first known. Though his recovery was still ongoing, he walked slowly with a cane now, each step careful but purposeful. The chair he had once been confined to stood abandoned in his office, a reminder rather than a prison. The weight he had lost had returned, but his face carried new lines, etched not from age but from battles fought and endured. He was not the same man the world had known before the accident. He was something greater, tempered by silence and reborn with fire. On a quiet evening in December, the center hosted its first public celebration. Families, patients, doctors, and journalists crowded into the main hall, where garlands of evergreen framed the stage. Evans stepped forward slowly, leaning on his cane, but when he began to speak, his voice carried with the authority of the man who had once commanded boardrooms. "For months," he said, "my world was silence. I was alive, aware, and desperate to be heard. And in that silence, I learned what true power is. Not the power of wealth or titles, but the power of connection. A blink, a letter, a single word. These are miracles, and we must never take them for granted." He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the room. "This center is proof that no voice should ever be lost again. Not mine, not yours, not anyone's." Applause thundered, but Lily hardly heard it. Her eyes were fixed on him, her heart swelling with the knowledge that she had been part of this, that their shared fight in the shadows had become a beacon for the world. Later, after the celebration had ended and the crowd had dispersed, Evan asked her to join him in the garden just beyond the new wing. The air was crisp, their breath forming little clouds as they walked slowly along the snow-dusted path. Strings of white lights glowed faintly in the trees, casting everything in a soft, magical haze. He stopped near a bench, turning to face her. His hand trembled slightly, though whether from the cold or nerves she could not tell. Slowly, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lily's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a simple but elegant ring that glimmered under the lights. His voice, though quiet, carried every ounce of the strength he had fought so hard to reclaim. "You gave me my life back," he said. "Not the life of a CEO, not the life of a millionaire, but the life of a man who still had something to hope for. You believed in me when no one else did. I don't want to waste another moment. I want to spend the rest of this second chance with you." Tears blurred her vision. She laughed, a choked, disbelieving sound, before nodding quickly, her voice breaking. "Yeah," she whispered. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, his hand unsteady but sure. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fall away. The snow, the lights, the weight of everything they had endured. There was only the two of them, standing in the cold December air, bound together not by circumstance, but by the impossible road they had walked side by side. The newspapers would later write their own headlines. "Millionaire CEO trades power for love, from silence to forever. The nurse who saved a Titan's heart." But none of the words could ever capture what it truly meant. For Lily, it was not about headlines or miracles or foundations. It was about the man who had blinked her name into the dark, the man who had heard her when no one else did, the man who had given her brother a future in her own life, a purpose she had never imagined. For Evan, it was not about reclaiming a company or outsmarting a board. It was about rediscovering his humanity, finding in the quiet devotion of one woman the strength to return, to fight, to live. And as the snow fell softly around them, he kissed her, and for the first time since the accident, since the coma, since the silence, he felt not like a man recovering, but like a man beginning. What makes the tale of Lily and Evan so striking is not the miracle of medicine alone, but the miracle of human faith. It reminds us that in a world obsessed with status, numbers, and control, the most powerful forces are often invisible. A nurse's stubborn refusal to stop speaking into the silence, a patient's fragile determination to blink through the darkness, a love that grew where no one expected it. Yes, it has the trappings of a fairy tale. A beautiful young nurse, a wealthy CEO, a brush with death followed by redemption and romance. But beneath the surface lies something much more universal. The idea that no human being is truly lost as long as someone still believes they are worth saving. To me, that is the heart of this story. Not the headlines, not the foundation, not even the dramatic return of a man to power. It is the quiet moment when a woman held a hand and whispered into the void, and the void whispered back. It's a reminder that miracles are rarely lightning strikes. They are built patiently, blink by blink, word by word, until one day the impossible is no longer impossible at all.